Have you ever felt something break inside you for no apparent reason? As if a part of who you were simply stopped making sense overnight. As if the world that seemed so solid last week were now covered by a crack so fine, so subtle, that only you can see it. If this feeling is familiar, I need you to listen very carefully to what I am about to tell you. You are not losing your mind. You are not depressed. You are not losing control of your life. You are going through something much older, much deeper, and much more sacred than any modern word can describe. You are waking up. And what almost no one tells you is that there are 5 very specific phases within this path. 5 portals that every soul passes through when it begins to emerge from the collective sleep. 5 phases that will define the next 10, 20, perhaps 30 years of your life, depending on how you react to each one. Some people take entire decades to leave the first phase. Others jump 3 phases at once in a single year of absolute chaos. And there is a minority, a small, silent, and almost invisible minority, that will reach the 5th phase and, after that, will never be able to live as they did before. Before this video ends, you will know exactly which phase you are in today. You will understand why some people around you seem to sleep so soundly, while you can no longer close your eyes to certain truths. And you will discover the rarest sign of all, the one that appears well before most people realize they are waking up. But before we get there, I need to take you back to the beginning, because the only honest way to understand where you are today is to understand exactly where every soul starts. And the starting point is, at the same time, the most common, the most painful, and the most difficult to see, because it is the phase where we don't even know we are asleep. The first phase of awakening is, paradoxically, the phase where you don't know you are asleep. And that is precisely what makes it so powerful. Because no one chooses to be unconscious. No one wakes up in the morning, looks in the mirror, and says, "Today I will live completely identified with my ego, reacting to emotions as if they were myself, letting automatic thoughts define the destiny of my entire day." And yet that is exactly what the absolute majority of people do, every day, their whole lives. In this phase, you exist deep within the territory of the ego. Thoughts and emotions govern without any awareness. You identify so completely with what you feel, what you think, what you believe, that you can no longer perceive the difference between yourself and the storm passing through your mind. When someone offends you, you aren't hurt. You are the hurt. When something goes wrong, you aren't angry. You are the anger. The ego holds you with a force so subtle that you don't even notice you are being held by it. In this state, life happens to you, never by you. You react all the time. You defend yourself. You justify yourself. You fight with traffic, with your boss, with the past, with the future, with people who aren't even in your life anymore. Everything seems predetermined, and any trauma that appears only reinforces that silent belief that you have no control over anything. Life becomes something that rolls over you like a giant wave, and you just endure. You just resist. You just survive. And here is the cruelest detail of this phase. You believe this is your personality. You believe that being anxious, being explosive, being pessimistic, being suspicious, being insecure is who you are. You cling to your own name, your history, your surname, the social role you were given before you could even speak, and you see the whole world through this blurred lens. When you look at another person, you don't see who they are. You see only the reflection of your own projections, your own fears, your own unresolved expectations. Unconsciousness is not stupidity. It is not a lack of intelligence. There are brilliant, intellectually sophisticated people with 2-3 degrees who live their entire lives in this phase. Unconsciousness is, in fact, a sleep of identification, a deep forgetting of the difference between the observer and that which is being observed. It is the soul dressed by the ego as if it were a costume it forgot it could take off. And it is from this forgetting that everything begins. But before I show you how this sleep begins to crack, how the second phase arrives, knocking absolutely everything down, I need to take an important pause. Because there is something happening at this exact moment in your life that probably no other spirituality video has explained to you yet. The wealth matrix. If you are watching this video this far, It is because something inside you already knows it is ready to change. And perhaps this silent something is exactly the reason why your financial life never takes off, no matter how hard you try. I will repeat this sentence because it is uncomfortable. The reason money slips through your fingers is not a lack of work. It is not a lack of intelligence. It is not a lack of opportunity. It is the ego of the first phase holding you within unconscious patterns that were installed in your mind before you were even 7 years old. Beliefs about worthiness, blocks about scarcity, programs inherited from your family lineage that no one taught you how to rewrite. You can read all the prosperity books in the world. You can do all the morning affirmations. You can visualize all the abundant scenarios that exist. But as long as your energy matrix remains locked in the frequency of unconsciousness, the universe will continue to deliver exactly what matches what you are emitting under the radar. That is exactly why the wealth matrix was created. It is a practical, deep path, based on the same spiritual principles you are about to discover in the next phases, only applied directly to the energy of abundance. It is the tool that was missing so that spiritual awakening could finally transform into financial awakening as well. Because the truth that few have the courage to tell you is this: wealth begins long before money. It begins the exact moment you leave the phase of unconsciousness and start to vibrate at another frequency. And this frequency can be activated. It can be trained. It can be installed systematically day after day in your life. The wealth matrix is exactly that. A complete wealth attraction system for those who are exiting the collective sleep and want this new level of consciousness to also be reflected in their bank account, in opportunities, in contracts, in businesses, in relationships with money, and above all in your freedom to choose. If this resonates with you, the link is here in the description. It is not for everyone, it is for those who are already feeling the call and are tired of waiting for a life that never arrives. Now let's move on, because the next phase is where everything begins to break. And this breaking, as you will understand in a few seconds, is exactly the portal that opens the path to real abundance. The death of the ego is not a physical death. It is something, in certain aspects, even more terrifying than that. It is the dissolution of everything you believed yourself to be throughout your entire existence until now. Imagine for a moment that for decades you built a huge house with thousands of small bricks. Each brick was a belief about yourself. I am shy. I am intelligent. I am from such and such family. I am of such and such religion. I am the younger brother. I am the one who always succeeds. I am the one who never succeeds. Brick by brick, year by year, decade by decade, you were raising this huge house, and this house, for all intents and purposes, was your identity. Now imagine that suddenly, without warning, something begins to make this house fall. It could be a loss, a betrayal, an illness, an unexpected firing, a relationship that ends without warning, a solitary trip, a dream with a symbol you can't get out of your head, a book that falls into your hands by chance, a sentence heard on the street that seems to have been said directly to you. The trigger varies from person to person, but the effect is always the same. The walls begin to crumble. And then you find yourself standing alone in the middle of the rubble, asking for the first time in your life the question that will change everything. If I am not all this that I thought I was, then who am I? This question, asked for the first time in truth without looking away, is the gateway to the second phase. The death of the ego sweeps away entire concepts. Concepts about life, about God, about religion, about family, about love, about success, about who deserves what. Everything you simply swallowed from society without ever questioning begins to be spat back out. You go through a phase of emptiness, an emptiness that scares, because it seems that nothing makes sense anymore. Old pleasures no longer satisfy you. Old friendships seem too superficial. Old certainties turn to smoke. But, in the middle of this apparently terrible emptiness, something absolutely extraordinary begins to happen. A space opens up inside you, a space that was always there, but was too occupied by the noise of the ego to be perceived. And it is in this silent space that you begin to feel, for the first time in your life, the presence of the observer. The observer is the part of you that watches. The part that is behind thoughts, not inside them. The part that sees anger arise and does not become the anger. The part that sees fear appear and remains in silence. The part that was there when you were 5 years old and will be there on your last day. Immutable, quiet, eternal. That which some traditions call the witness, others call presence, others call essence. But whatever the name, it is the first time you realize that there is someone inside you who is not your character. This perception changes absolutely everything. You begin to understand, slowly, that the ego is a construction, a mask, a sum of conditionings, traumas, experiences, expectations and beliefs that were piled on top of your real essence. It is not you. It never was. And here something very curious happens, which almost no one warns you about beforehand. The ego does not die only once. The ego dies in layers. Each time you think you have finally understood, finally integrated, finally passed the phase, an even deeper layer appears. An older trait, a more hidden belief, a more subtle identification, and you must, once again, let go. Once again, let it die. Once again, pass through the emptiness. That is why many people give up right here. They run back to the first phase. They hastily rebuild a new identity, usually spiritualized, to plug the hole that the emptiness opened. They become an enlightened version of the same old character, with different clothes, different vocabulary, but with the same egoic structure underneath. It is such a common trap that it has a name in almost every tradition in the world. This is the most painful part of the journey, but it is also without a doubt the most liberating, because when you realize that the ego is a story and not your true essence, the ego begins to lose power over you. And it is exactly at this moment that the third phase begins to call. And the thirst it brings is like nothing you have ever felt before. After the death of the ego comes a thirst that no glass of water from the material world can quench. This is the phase of the search, and it has an unmistakable trademark. You begin to ask questions that never occurred to you before. Who am I really? Why was I born? Is there a purpose? Is there a God? Is there a soul? What happens when the body dies? Why do some people suffer so much and others seem so protected? Why did I end up in this exact family, in this city, in this body, in this historical era, and not in any other possibility? These questions begin to appear with a force that can no longer be ignored. They wake you up at 3 in the morning. They haunt you in the shower. They visit you when you are driving. They make you stop in the middle of a banal conversation because, suddenly, nothing else matters besides finding answers. And then the pilgrimage begins. You devour books, documentaries, videos, channels, podcasts, lives, ancient texts, Eastern philosophies, mystical traditions, tarot cards, astrology, numerology, Christian mysticism, Buddhism, Hermeticism, Kabbalah, shamanism. You read Arthur Miller, Christopher King, Jung, Joe Miller, Nathaniel Good, ancient masters, modern masters. You experiment with meditation, prayer, channeling, fasting, herbal baths, retreats, breathing techniques, automatic writing, women's circles, men's circles, therapy, regression. Each new piece of knowledge brings a feeling of lightness. A light turns on inside you when you read a sentence that seems to have been written by your own soul. It is as if you were recognizing ancient truths forgotten somewhere in time, as if you were remembering and not learning. But beware, because the search phase has a subtle, dangerous, treacherous trap, and this is where many people get lost for years and years on end. The trap is this: the search can become a new addiction, a new form of escape. Instead of searching to integrate, you start searching to collect. Courses upon courses, masters upon masters, methods upon methods, content upon content, accumulating spiritual information as if it in itself were going to provoke transformation. But knowledge is not transformation. Knowledge without application becomes a burden. It becomes an identity. It becomes a spiritual ego, which is perhaps the most dangerous form of ego that exists because it disguises itself as light. The sign that you are going through the search phase in a healthy way is strangely simple. With each new learning, something inside you falls silent. You need less, not more. You speak less, post less, defend less, and listen more. You listen to people. You listen to nature. You listen to the silence. You listen, above all, to that internal voice that was always there, but that you had never had the courage to listen to. You begin to realize that all traditions at their core point to the same nuclear truth, that all masters say with different words exactly the same thing, that the path was never in the books, it was always in the experience, and that the time has come to stop looking for answers outside and start trusting the answer that was always inside. It is also in this phase that a very particular loneliness appears, a spiritual loneliness. You look around and realize that few people can follow you in this type of conversation. What was obvious to you 2 years ago now sounds strange even to your family. People ask if you are okay, if you are sleeping well, if you need to talk to someone. And you smile because you know it cannot be explained, not in words at least. This loneliness has a purpose. It forces you to develop a direct relationship, without intermediaries, with your own interiority. You learn to be company for yourself. You learn to listen to the silence. You learn that presence is, itself, an answer. And that the universe talks in many ways to those who have learned to be quiet enough to listen. It is when this internal listening begins to become stronger than any external voice, stronger than any guru, stronger than any book, that the fourth phase is born. And the fourth phase, I must warn you, is where your life begins to be literally dismantled and reassembled in front of your own eyes. The fourth phase is the phase where pretending becomes physically unbearable. You wake up one day and realize you can no longer go to that job. You sit at that family dinner and realize you can no longer smile at those comments. You open your mouth to talk to that long-time friend and realize that the words from before simply don't come out anymore. Something inside you refuses definitively to continue playing the role. This is the phase of the emergence of the authentic self, and it tends to be chaotic. Here the person you have been for decades begins to fall apart publicly in plain sight. Jobs are abandoned, relationships come to an end, old friendships drift away, cities are changed, entire lifestyles are left behind, not because you want to destroy everything, but because your frequency has changed. And what vibrates at another frequency can no longer coexist without pain with that which still vibrates at the old frequency. It is a period of much visible loss, but it is also a period of much invisible gain. You begin to recover a version of yourself that had been forgotten for a long time. Maybe it's the 6-year-old child who loved to draw before they told you that art doesn't make money. Maybe it's the teenager who wrote poetry in secret before they told you it was better to study for the entrance exam. Maybe it's the young person who dreamed of traveling the world before they convinced you that stability was more important than freedom. Maybe it's simply the person who laughed loudly, who danced without shame, who spoke without a filter, before society taught you how to behave. This person returns, and they return with force. Along with them, all the emotions that were shelved for decades also return. Old hurts reappear to be finally felt. Traumas that seemed overcome ask to be revisited. Tears well up for no apparent reason. In the middle of the street, in the middle of a meeting, in the middle of dinner. Laughter arises out of nowhere. You become an emotional roller coaster. And this is exactly what needs to happen, because you are literally being cleaned from the inside, layer by layer. The body also feels it. Ascension symptoms begin to appear. Increased sensitivity to the energy of people and environments, lucid dreams, premonitions that are confirmed, synchronicity in sequence, repeated numbers, impossible encounters, changes in sleep, changes in appetite, sensations of vibration, heat, or tingling in the body. It is not illness, it is energetic reorganization. It is your frequency adjusting to support the new level of consciousness that is arriving. And then slowly, after the dust begins to settle, comes the fifth phase, the rarest of all, the aligned life. The aligned life is not the perfect life. It is not the life without problems. It is not the life without pain. It is something much deeper than any fantasy of an earthly paradise. It is the life in which every part of you is at peace with every other part of you. The mind no longer fights with the heart. The heart no longer fights with the body. The body no longer fights with the soul. Everything is talking to each other. Everything is coherent. Everything is flowing in the same direction at the same time at the same rhythm. In this phase, you become the father and mother you perhaps never had. You become your own best friend. You treat yourself with the sweetness you always wished to receive from others, and never did. And when this internal love overflows, because it overflows naturally without effort, without technique, it begins to spill over onto other people, without demands, without expectations, without an agenda. You begin to understand the limitations of others without being hurt by them. You recognize that each person is doing the best they can within the level of consciousness they are in. You stop demanding that others understand you because now you understand yourself. And this internal self-sufficiency does not isolate you. On the contrary, it brings you closer to everything in a way that was previously impossible. You begin to feel vividly and daily the interconnection with everything, with the trees, with the animals, with strangers on the street, with the rain, with the silence, with that which seems inert. Everything begins to have presence. Everything begins to have a voice, even if invisible. And this perception ceases to be a beautiful concept you read in some book and becomes a living experience, something you feel in your chest every day, in every small moment. But alignment does not deny the shadow. On the contrary, those who reach the fifth phase are precisely those who have learned to look at their own darkness without looking away. Those who understand that light only exists because darkness exists. That everything, absolutely everything, is part of the great dance of consciousness, and that denying a part is, at heart, denying the whole. This is true spiritual maturity. It is not floating above the world. It is stepping on the ground with more presence than ever. And there is a beautiful paradox here in the fifth phase that is worth saying out loud. The person who has reached this point no longer needs anyone, and precisely because of that, can finally love for real. Because as long as you need the other to feel complete, what exists there is not love. It is disguised neediness. It is fantasized dependency. It is fear of being alone wearing a mask of affection. But when your presence is already enough for yourself, the encounter with the other ceases to be hunger and becomes communion. You don't choose people for what they will take from your emptiness. You choose them for what you can celebrate together from your fullness. Relationships in the fifth phase are much rarer, but also much more real, and the same goes for work, for money, for purpose. You stop doing things for what they will give you and start doing them for what they are in themselves. The result is that, paradoxically, everything begins to flow with more ease, because the universe responds better to surrender than to despair. Now stop for a second, take a deep breath, and ask yourself with total honesty, which of these 5 phases are you in today? Maybe you are still in the first, realizing for the first time that something is strange, that the autopilot has started to fail, and that there is an internal voice that won't stop whispering uncomfortable truths. Maybe you are in the second, standing in the middle of the rubble of your old identity, not yet knowing who you are, but already certain that you are no longer who you were. Maybe you are in the third, devouring information, seeking answers, going from master to master, from technique to technique, with a thirst that seems infinite and that, paradoxically, only increases the more you drink. Maybe you are in the fourth, seeing your life being dismantled in front of you, losing jobs, ending relationships, recovering forgotten parts of yourself, crying for no reason, laughing for no reason, being cleaned from the inside in a way that no one around you can understand. Or maybe, and this is a rare but absolutely real possibility, you are already touching the fifth, feeling this silent peace that depends on nothing external, this love for yourself that overflows without effort, this living interconnection with everything that exists. In whatever phase you are in, I want you to hear this with great attention. Nothing is wrong with you. Everything is happening at the right time. Every tear, every loss, every sleepless night, every unanswered question, every moment of confusion, every relationship that is gone, every door that has closed, all of this is your soul unfolding in the only way it knows how. You are not broken. You are opening up, and perhaps that is exactly why this video appeared to you today. Because the algorithm is one thing, but synchronicity is another. When a soul is ready for the next step appears. In the form of a book, a person, a dream, a video. And the soul's work is just to recognize the sign and have the courage to follow. And that is exactly why I want to invite you to the next step. Because awakening does not end in these 5 phases, it only begins. What comes next is deeper, more uncomfortable, and more transformative than everything said so far. You were born seeing what others don't see, and spent your life apologizing for it. Stay silent for another year and lose who you were. The awakening matrix is the end of the lie you were taught to live, and that is exactly what I will talk about in the next video. If you want to be notified when it comes out, subscribe to the channel right now, turn on the notification bell, and leave me a comment down below answering a single question. In which of the 5 phases did you recognize yourself today? I read all the comments, but more importantly than that, other awakening souls read them too. Your story might be the exact sign someone was waiting for to understand that they are not alone on this journey, that there are people crossing the same abysses, climbing the same mountains, discovering the same ancient truths. If this video touched you in any way, share it with that person who has been calling you at 3 in the morning without knowing how to explain why. Perhaps they are, without realizing it, knocking on the door of the same awakening that is happening inside you. Until our next meeting, and remember, you are not losing your mind, you are finally waking up.